What's going on, my people? Welcome back to another episode of the Stop the Count podcast. In this episode, we will go over what went down over the weekend in combat sports and the Mexican national soccer team. First, for some news, it has been alleged that Conor McGregor had a physical altercation with a woman in a restroom during Game 4 of the NBA Finals. Now, this is a bad thing for Conor, but we shouldn't be too quick to judge. Although I don't condemn this behavior, we just have to wait and see. Also, the UFC announced some amazing fights. The first fight going down in Nashville on August 5th. Umar Nurmagomedov will be going up against Corey Sandhagen. What a fight this will be. Also announced was a fight night going down in Singapore on August 26th. The main event will be Max Holloway going up against the Korean Zombie. So many incredible fights await us for the UFC in the coming months. Now for some boxing news, and more specifically on Canelo's next opponent. It first looked as if Canelo was going to fight Dimitri Bivol in the rematch, but now it looks as if that fight's off. Then the names started coming around of David Benavidez, that fight's off. Then jermellcharlo, that one's off too. And now Badu Jack has came out and said he will not be fighting Canelo. So who knows what's going on with Canelo and his team, and hopefully he's able to fight in September. And also, Ryan Garcia and Oscar De La Hoya are suing each other. Typical Golden Boy shit show. They're both claiming a breach of contract. Now, getting into the Bellator card. What an amazing card this was. Getting into the fighters I mentioned in my last video. First, Ramazankurmagomedov. He was able to get an incredible first-round knockout after hitting his opponent with a beautiful knee in the clinch. The next person I mentioned was kylecrutchmer. He was able to get a knockout pretty much from some vicious ground shots. Now getting straight into the title fights, the first title fight, patriciopitbull versus sergiopettis. What a fucking fight this was. What a performance for Sergio. Everything was on point for him. I'm pretty sure we all seen that amazing spinning kick that landed for Sergio, visibly hurting Pitbull. I believe Pitbull's weight cut physically drained him, and that was the main reason for this loss. But still, Sergio Pettis was great on this night and fought an amazing fight. A big surprise win. For the main event, vadimnemkov versus yoelromero. Getting straight to the point, vadimnemkov was just dominant, landing pretty much whatever he wanted. He wasn't able to put away a tough yoelromero, but it was still a great performance from Nemkov, really showing he's a top 2 light heavyweight in the world. And I would hope one day he's able to show it in the UFC, although I believe that would be very difficult. Now for the UFC Fight Night. First, getting into the tap controversy between Dan Argueta versus Ronnie Lawrence. Dan was dominant, especially on the ground, getting Ronnie into submissions, and Ronnie was able to get out of a couple guillotines, but in a specific guillotine, referee Keith Peterson stopped the fight after he thought Ronnie tapped, but in all honesty, there was in no way near a tap. There was a little movement that looked like a tap, but it was just a hand replacement after Peterson grabbed Ronnie's hand. Now, it was ruled a no contest, thankfully, and hopefully they will be able to fight soon. Next, I'll talk about Alessandrocosta. He was great on the feet, especially with his leg kicks, compromising John Flick's leg early in the fight and just dominating him from there. He was able to finish him on the ground in the second with a vicious ground and pound. Also, Manuel Torres, what an amazing finish from him. After being hurt in the fight, he's able to come back and finish Mota with a crazy elbow. Great performance from Torres. And next, armantsarukyan. He put in another good performance, also finishing his opponent, Joaquim Silva, after being hurt. Sarukyan was hitting Silva with everything on the floor, and Silva was not responding at all. The fight should have been stopped earlier, but at least it was stopped. Shout out to Keith Peterson. Sarukyan did call out pretty much all the top 5 and the champion of the lightweight division. Who do you want to see Sarukyan fight next? For me, a fight between Sarukyan and Beneil Dariush would be amazing. But in general, the rematch with Islam would be probably the toughest test for Islam if it's not Beneil Dariush. Sarukyan has been calling out Michael Chandler as well, but who knows what could happen. For the main event, Marvin Vettori versus Jared Cannonier. What an amazing fight. The first round was so good for both fighters, but Marvin was getting the best of Jared. But once the second round came, Jared dominated from there on out. When I say domination, he broke the middleweight significant strike record on Marvin, which is kind of bullshit because what do you consider a significant strike? But nonetheless, huge congrats to Jared on an excellent performance. Now getting into boxing, the matchroom card, first getting into a fight I mentioned last week, Shakram Gayasev versus Harold Calderon. It was a very good performance from Shakram. It might not have been the most exciting fight, but he was able to win a unanimous decision victory. For the main event, Regisprograis versus Danielitozorilla. Now, this fight to me was awful. I didn't enjoy watching it at all. Regis was dropped in the first round, which the referee mistakenly called a slip, but Regis was able to drop Sorria in the third round, and from there on out, the fight was pretty much awful. A bad performance from Regis. Regis was still able to pull out a win, a good decision, but the cards were terrible. In my opinion, there's no way Regis won by that big of a margin. Now for the Showtime card, getting into the prospects I mentioned in my last video, Vegaslarfield was able to get a unanimous decision victory, boxing his opponent's head off. And Rocky Ogden, what a performance. He was able to get his opponent out of there with a late first round stoppage. Absolute killer. The main event, timtszyu versus carlosocampos. What a first round. Both of these fighters came out to kill, and it was timtszyu that came out on top with an amazing first round knockout. Huge statement made. Charlo versus you has to be next. No other fight should happen before this fight for either fighters. To finish off the video, talking a little bit about the Mexican national team and how they looked this past week. First, the game against the US. I didn't have a problem with the formation Diegococca sent out, but the players you started. The first being probably the biggest mistake, and that is Jorge Sanchez. He was made to look a fool the whole time. He was in the game being one of the main players at fault for the US's goals. He's not played good at Ajax, and you have Julian Araujo on the bench. The second biggest would be not playing Santi Jimenez. From the start, arguably your most on-form player at the moment, and you start Henry Martin, who's not been the best the last couple months. The third flaw is not playing with a clear idea of game. They were just thrown out there and told to play like Atlas and attempt some long passes. That functions when you have a good target man bringing down the ball to a clinical finisher, which was not out there on the field. The fourth and final problem I see is the development of youth players and recruitment of dual nationals. First, talking about the dual nationals, there are so many players that are currently playing for the US that really didn't have a choice between the US or Mexico, as the Mexico wasn't pursuing them. Just for example, some players from some other nations as well as the US. Yoelromero, he was never pursued by Mexico until it was too late and he had already fully decided on representing Argentina. Cade Cow also never really pursued by Mexico. Brandon Vasquez, he already stated Mexico never pursued him, so he didn't have to make a choice. His only choice was the US. Now, Ricardo Pepi was someone Mexico did pursue, although the US were able to pull him off. All players at positions of need for Mexico, and they all look to have already chosen their respective nations. For youth development in Mexico, it's horrible. A youth player doesn't debut until they're at least 22, when in the USMNT, most of their starting players are that age. Now, talking about the second half of the US game, what a horrible display of everything from this Mexico side. They just wanted to fight, and even then, they were losing those little fights. The federation needs to take a big look at all these problems because it all starts at the top with Alejandro Iraragorri, the biggest cancer in Mexican football in the last couple years. The only reason Atlas and diegococca have been relevant is because of this fucking rat. Emilio Azcárraga and Televisa, the main reason the selección has been horrible for this long. The reason all of those America players were playing is because of this piece of shit. Diegococca is only the manager because of Grupo Orlegui and the corruption in the federation. Before Atlas, what did Diegococca do as a manager? He did fuck all. The selección needs a Mexican. The only two people that should have been in consideration for me is nachoambriz and jimmylozano. But for me, my number one is jimmylozano. He's already familiar with these players as he was the manager at the Olympics where Mexico took third, and they did play well. And you could say, yes, he's young and inexperienced, but I'm pretty sure every Mexican player would rather die with a Mexican leading them instead of an Argentinian. And finally, I'm not saying this as a Chivas fan, I'm saying this as a fan of the Mexican national team. The beige should be Chivas players, not because they're the best, although some of them are better than the people on the current roster, but they play with heart. Pocho Guzman, the best Mexican attacking midfielder of the last 3 years, not been called up for that anti-doping shit. He served his suspension for a reason. Alan Mozo is so much better than Jorge Sanchez and is in better form. He was not called up. Chiqueto Rosco, who's just played his heart out in the Liga, is a much better player than Israel Reyes and Toro Guzman, and he as well was not called up. In the past, most of the best selección teams have had a strong base of Chivas players. Now, for the game against Panama, the lineup was better than the one that was sent out by Coca against the US, although the first half was decent for Mexico, especially since they were able to pull out a goal from a play that looked dead thanks to Uriel Antuna. But the first half still, Mexico looked bad. Panama wasn't able to put away clear chances, and that saved Mexico. The second half was horrible for Mexico. They played like shit. There was an amazing goal from Panama that was called back due to a close offside. But Mexico 100% didn't deserve to win this game. A horrible performance from the team and diegococca. Nothing different here. Mexico won by the narrowest of margins, 1-0 against a Panama side that they were so much better than. Diegococca is a problem, but the players are a big problem as well. Not doing much to win convincingly. Still, not playing with a good style. Change needs to happen, and quick. If not, the only thing that awaits us in the 2026 World Cup is going to be a major fracaso. Thank you guys for staying until the end. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And also follow me on Twitter at StopTheCount10. See you later on this week as I talk about the fights coming up over the weekend. See you then.